Welcome to the Fabricated Metals Podcast, powered by Process Metals Innovators, your trusted partner in smart, scalable fabrication. I'm your host, Dana Hansen, and in every episode, we explore the trends, tools, and technologies shaping the future of manufacturing. Whether it's sourcing smarter, improving lead times, or streamlining production, we share real-world insights to help you stay ahead in an ever-evolving industry. Let's get into it. Hi, Chris. Hi, Denny. Thanks for joining in on our next podcast.
Well, thanks, Taylor. Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one today. We're going to talk about saving smarter today. And Denny, you're going to add in some really awesome things about us having our own trucks and how that makes some savings here pretty attractive to our customers with being able to ship our own products, which is pretty neat. Today's episode is going to explore how true cost savings are achieved in metal manufacturing, not just through part price, but through design decisions, logistics controls, inventory strategy, and waste reduction. The goal is to make savings practical and tangible, showing how PMI helps customers reduce total cost by partnering early and manufacturing smarter. So again, let's, start in on talking about some things about when customers think about saving money. What do you think they usually focus on first?
Well, usually the request is a price, right? The quote comes in, they send us a print and say, let us know what this might cost. Mm-hmm. And that is really just the very, very beginnings of ways we can start piecing together costing so that we can offer a price. But as you mentioned in the beginning, there's so many other pieces of this that we should be and our customers should be working on. And we'll capture Denny while he's here. Mm-hmm. One of the big ones is logistics. How do we get parts out to our customers? And that's often not thought about until the very end of any process. And Denny knows that because usually when we're manufacturing, we leave him about 30 minutes of a 30-day process to get something done. Yeah,
that's what we do.
It's not unusual, right? But the point is that we wanted to make is we do have our own fleet of trucks. And Denny, you ship out LTL and you use our trucks and you use full loads from other carriers as well. Why don't you just give us your perspective on what seems to work best for what types of customers?
Sure. Obviously, there's a need for all of that in our manufacturing estate. It doesn't pay to run our 53-foot van to the cities for one skid. So obviously, that cost savings would probably lean towards the LTL. If it's time sensitive, or full truckload stuff, that's where we may take our truck just to make sure it got there today. If that customer needed that product by 2 p.m. today, obviously LTL is not a viable option. They're not going to get there until tomorrow or maybe the next day. And today's LTL world is kind of crazy. You could call it 8 a.m. in the morning, and it's not guaranteed it's going to pick up today. It could get pushed out to tomorrow's board. So that's where we could run into some issues on the LTL side. So it's a balancing act of when do they need it by, the cost. I mean, there's some other options like hot shot, but those are expensive costs. So sometimes customers are willing to do that or wait for our next run to that location for our truck, for we need to get it there today and we're going to drop out and do what we need to do to get our customer their parts. So there's a lot of different scenarios that it all kind of mixes together that we use to save money for our customers and ourselves.
Sure.
And still get product where it needs to go on time.
Yep, that makes all the sense in the world. Now, to be fair to our 3,500 listening customers out there for our podcast, what does LTL mean?
Less than truckload.
Okay, so less than load. That's when you don't have 48 pallets or 46,000 pounds.
Right.
You have a single pallet, maybe 300 pounds, maybe 2 pounds. You never know, right?
2 pounds usually go a small parcel or FedEx or something.
Sure, UPS, something like that.
So LTLs, less than truckload would be anywhere from 1 to 6, 7 skids typically, and under like 10,000 pounds.
And LTL shipments usually don't go direct, right? They end up at a distribution center somewhere?
Correct. They'll take it back to their terminals, unload, and reload it to their truck for the next day going to that city location.
Hopefully the next day, right?
Hopefully. So that product, gets unloaded twice, gets loaded twice on their trucks and here. So, when you're risking damage, it could get lost in the warehouse somewhere, get sent to the wrong customer, I mean, we've had all that kind of things happen where our project ends up in Arizona, not Minneapolis. So that's kind of the balancing act of using outside services like that. We don't control it. So
that makes sense. I think sometimes, Dana, what we've done is we've taken customers that are in like areas and basically created like a milk route, right? Where you can put it on our trucks. All the loads themselves are less than load or LTL packaging, but because we're going to that area, we can put them on our truck again and control that delivery time frame versus being stuck at some depot somewhere for who knows what day it might leave there, right?
correct. Yep.
So I guess that's a big benefit of having our own trucks.
Well, when you talk about changing the customer experience, like being in sales, I know talking to our customer, when that stuff goes on the PMI truck and you say it's going to be there at 10, I know it's going to be there at 10.
Right.
It's going to show up on time with a smile. And then you know that you can do that returnable packaging too.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's several of our customers that use totes or skid sizes that fit their product uniquely. So we ship in those packages, and then when we drop off, we're able to bring them back and reuse instead of have to order new packaging for every time we run their product. So there's several customers, and I think it's a great benefit for both sides.
Sure. I mean, it's expensive. It's expensive to have to recycle now or throw away the garbage cost, all of that too.
Yep.
And the truck is coming back. So to be able to keep reusing that, some of the packaging we've even made here. So you make it pretty stout, lasts a long time. Just keep reusing it over and over again. And
Yeah, I think understanding that for ourselves and our customers, warehouse space is a premium and it's expensive. We've developed stackable hard metal, what would you call them, racks, maybe, if you will, that can stand on their own, and you can stack them maybe sometimes to 6 high. That's a big saver for space. And as Dana mentioned, obviously we can do all sorts of custom packaging because everyone has certain racks that may be in their receiving department. It may be at a painting department. That's the next stop for those parts. We can develop the right packaging to fit the very best for how they're going to use it. It could even be done based on batch sizes. We always paint 76 parts. So we really want a pallet that has 76 parts on it. That way we're not packaging and repackaging all the time. Another cost saver that many times people don't think about.
right.
One of the things we're going to talk about later, and I think this could apply to shipping, is there anything that our customers do inadvertently to us in shipping that is costing them more money?
I think sometimes lack of planning. We have some customers that are further away from us, and they had their POs set for this date, and all of a sudden they want it sooner, and they're asking their carriers, not our trucks, but their carriers, to expedite.
Oh, Denny, come on.
But just that planning of whether everybody has inventory control problems, and they thought they had parts they didn't, but it's usually the expedite. We need this tomorrow. Well, then there's options out there to do it, and just what you're willing to pay for.
They're pretty expensive.
They're very expensive.
Sure.
I mean, they could be $1,500 to get in the state of Wisconsin. I mean, so they're very expensive.
Yep.
But if you need it, the option's there, and we've done many of those.
Perfect. I think that's where we also have discussions sometimes with customers about safety stock. If it's something that they don't typically like to hold stock on for whatever reason that might be, it might be they're concerned about engineering changes that will create obsolescence, so they don't want to have inventory. That's totally understood. But sometimes if we can hold some safety stock, at least it takes the lead time of production out of that scenario or that equation, and we can jump on a next day truck. So again, that's something that we want our customers to be aware of, and we often speak to. What's a sensible safety stock level for us in case you have that inventory count that goes bad or something gets damaged in their plant where they do need a quick ship option?
Right. Absolutely.
Thanks, Denny. That wasn't so tough, was it?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you'll come back and visit us sometime.
Maybe someday.
All right, Dan, you are here and joining us to talk a little bit about some things that you see on prints. So thanks for joining Chris and I.
Thanks for having me.
Dan works in the process planning department, so he gets to see all the new prints that come in here, all the new parts that we make. He gets to set them all up in our system, and you get to see some crazy things.
Who stays?
There are some interesting things that we see put on prints that can actually be costing our customers a little extra money than maybe they'd like to spend. And I guess some of those things, Dan, that you see would be, can you give us some examples?
A lot of times it's quite easy for an engineer to over-engineer a part, ask for machining tolerances on a sheet metal part that doesn't need machining tolerances. A lot of times these bigger companies are having interns just put tolerance in them on prints. So we see a lot of that where we can actually, go back to the customer and say, hey, it's a sheet metal part. Does it really need to be that tight?
I just had one today. As an example today, there was a part that had an offset bend. It had a couple slotted holes. Obviously, we know material can usually float plus or minus 3 or 5 thou, and then you've got your tolerancing block on there that was an ISO tolerancing block instead of just a standard tolerancing block. So as we went to bend this part all up, you know that after you create 1 or 2 bends, pretty much your tolerances are pretty much consumed. So by the time you get to the 3rd or 4th bend, you don't really have a whole lot left, right?
Yep, and that was a part that we were able to go back to the customer. It had, large slots, and so we went back to the customer and asked, how critical are these? And they're like, you guys
No
were
problem.
well within range.
No problem. So
they like
it's one of those examples of, we kind of hit the stop button right away and say, oh, this doesn't match print, but sometimes like customer really doesn't even need that. It's just something that was stuck on there that we have to, pull them to because that's what the print says, but they didn't really need it.
Yeah.
So again, like some of those other things with the GD&T. So GD&T tolerancing blocks can get very interesting because they make it a lot tighter to hold from different spots.
Yep. And, our quality department really loves when they see a lot of GD&T on parts. But the stuff that's been asked of us, I think we do a pretty good job of following what they need, and that's kind of what we're supposed to do. So
I would say we certainly understand what engineers are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think even when we've been doing quoting work for companies, it's often found the parts they're receiving from their current vendor don't match print. Sadly, that's not an unusual situation. And I think it comes down to a good part planning process with their vendor and themselves to really talk about what parts or what areas of any given part are critical. And I think, Dan, that's like what you're mentioning. Sometimes GD&T is fantastic for a mating part where you have to connect, let's say, 4 bolts to 4 holes.
Correct.
And those cannot be off. That has to be correct. But you don't want to tolerance those from a bend line. You want to tolerance them from a flat edge where you can control and exactly the placement of those holes. And I think that's where we've been able to meet with customers ahead of time before the quoting process even begins to start making sure we understand exactly what their intent is in engineering and making sure that our process will meet that intent.
Yeah.
So, and then we've seen things like my favorite one is when they add the note, break all sharp edges. And technically in the world of metal fabrication, that means we're going to tumble or grind the entire part. And that is many times a hand process, right? A manual process and extremely expensive. But when we go back to the customer and say, well, there's 70 cents involved in this $3 part for grinding, they go, why is that? We don't grind the parts. Well, because you have a note that says all sharp arches must be broken or be break. And that's where we just have to talk to them and say, the normal sharp edge from a shearing operation is okay. Yeah, it's okay. Then we can't have that note on a print. Little things like that are amazing how much they add dollars.
Yeah. And when you were talking about, customers having prior vendors where they'd made tweaks and changes to parts, we dealt with that with a new customer that we had recently gotten where they had a vendor for many years and had made changes to parts. Drawings weren't updated, files weren't updated. And so once we started making parts that matched, their print or what they had, they weren't quite what they wanted.
It didn't work.
So luckily we've been able to work back and forth with the customer and gotten them parts that work for them.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
So what are some of those other things, Dan, that you see?
Some little things, sometimes on weldments, if we can reduce welding a part and putting a bend in it instead of welding, 2 parts together to make a right angle, we can put a bend in it. That saves a lot of time. Welding can get kind of pricey. Also with like tapping of holes, doing peb nuts instead, or tapping right on our punch. If there's small enough parts where we can do the machining right into the punch, it saves a lot of time and money instead of having that extra process, that extra set of hands touching our part.
Wasn't there something you guys were able to do when it was a large weldment and it's using fixtures to locate everything? Is there a way to use tabs or something like that?
Yep, we have done some of that too. With interlocking tabs, there's some larger weldments that we've done that with, where then you're, instead of trying to measure every part, the parts just slid right together. You were able to weld it and, none the wiser the way you go. So,
Sure.
but all stuff like that gets approved through the customer. We don't just take it upon ourselves to change their parts.
Yeah, but that's a good point, because anytime you're handling a part, whether it's putting it together in a fixture or doing extra quality checks, that adds cost.
Yep.
And so if we can add tabs to something that automatically align things, reduce the need for fixturing, that's a cost savings right away for the customer.
Definitely.
So one benefit that we have here, if we do see a print that does have something that does have to be tight and it would have to be hard tooled, let's say that it's something that doesn't have super high volume that you'd have to maybe buy a hard tool to coil feed and stamp.
Mhm.
We could laser a blank or punch a blank, create that tool and hand feed it in and stamp it with, hand fed blank and stamp.
And we've done that with a few customers. Just developed blanks to hand feed because you're right. Progressive tooling gets quite expensive.
Mhm.
The coil fed gets even more expensive. So
Yeah.
we've done a little bit of that.
Because we do know sometimes those tight tolerances are definitely needed. Like not always you can get away from it. Sometimes there's a really tight spots that those parts have to go and it is what it is. So in order to achieve those every time, then you just hard tool it up and
And we have times where it can look like the simplest part with one hole in it, but it's very tight. It's very critical. Where then we would have to utilize our machining center. But we aim to please everything.
So I guess that is a huge benefit that probably many times we don't talk about. The fact that we can move things from stamping to fabrication to machining all under one roof saves time, it saves logistics costs, and allows us to approach things from many different methods,
Right.
all within the same company.
Yeah.
right. And that middle range of volume, like you talked about the punch. I mean, maybe you can hit on the punch a little bit about some of those things that punch can do.
Yeah, we've done a number of parts that have tap holes, countersunk holes, louvers, where putting a bank of louvers in a part, if you were to hard tool that, would get quite expensive. And then, you're looking at really high volume. We can stamp louvers right on the punch up to 3-inch. And usually it's just a matter of airflow for a lot of the customers we use. So it works really well. We can do a lot of the small forming right on the punch.
Yeah, that's a huge savings right there.
Yeah.
And those little mini dies aren't insanely expensive either.
Nope, it's quite more reasonable than in hard tooling.
Yeah. So how do tooling and setup decisions affect the pricing of a part?
A lot of times we'll try to amortize tooling costs, especially on the punch. If it's something that we can use through a variety of customers, whether it's a round or a square, a lot of times PMI will just eat that cost because we'll use it on multiple customers. So it's not fair to charge one customer for it, not the other. But usually we'll talk to the customers when we're in the quoting phase, let them know what's involved with it, and then give them the option if they want to buy it up front or have it spread out over the course of a job.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, my guess methods too is somewhat like we spoke about before. Because we have a punching machine and we have lasers, we don't necessarily need to use both sometimes. We could use one and do all the work, especially if it's something that was previously laser cut and then fed it somewhere else at another vendor's house. We might be able to pull that laser work, actually do it utilizing the punch and do the 3D work at the same time. Again, less handling of that part, cheaper price.
Definitely.
So is there anything else that you see, Dan, when you have a customer file that comes in that that is challenging at all, or?
No.
I think and Dan, I've talked about this many times. Obviously, we're using SolidWorks here for 3D modeling. One of the things that's very tough sometimes is converting CAM or AutoCAD or some of the other, some of the different ones. There are a bunch of them out there, and it does work. It just takes a bit more time sometimes, and making sure that models are complete. We end up sometimes where lines don't exist or things were drawn in haste or somehow got corrupted. So whenever we receive quoting packages, if we can get DXF drawing files, best solid prints, solid part models are great. That helps us move things along all that much faster. When we get just a flat print, a 2D print, we have to model that ourselves.
Yeah.
And that can lead to issues in that we miss something. Or just the dimension is slightly off. I just heard downstairs there was an issue that someone's program was only rounding to a single decimal point, where really the call out needed to be 3 decimal points. Little things like that can really throw you off.
Difference. Yep.
So models are really, really important. But I guess mostly just being available for us to talk through what the intent is again. And so that we can do what we need to do to make sure they get exactly what they want.
Yeah, and that helps a lot too. Knowing what the final product is going to be, where this part's going to be used. If we can ask the customer, if there is slots that can be added instead of holes. If it's just a small bracket that is getting attached to something, and we can switch it to a slot and make it 100 times easier for their assembly down the line.
Right.
It's nice to work with customers on stuff like that also.
Yeah, that's a great point because we've seen things like that from other customers that might be utilized in someone else's plant just for ease of manufacturing.
Yep.
It's a great point.
So an ideal world, Dan.
There is no engineering in an ideal world.
What would be like a tolerance, a block that you would say would be really great in the sheet metal world?
Ooh.
So I know we've seen some really, really tight ones that make it very, very hard. And
And we've seen some pretty generous ones. So you're looking at, 3 decimal places at 20 to 30,000 is pretty generous. So we enjoy that. That we can hit usually all day long. Anything tighter than that, it becomes a little bit more of a challenge, but I think all the guys on the floor are usually up to it. And we've had some where the holes are plus or minus 6 thou, or plus 6 minus nothing. So you've got a very small range on some of these holes, and we do that almost on a daily basis. And on that, we know what goes into that hole because we're building that part. So that helps too with the customer because they can put a really tight tolerance on a hole.
so then,
But if a PEM's going in it or a stud or it's a through hole for a screw, it might not need to be that tight. So
sure.
it's nice to know that stuff too.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
Yep, great points.
So then we kind of roll into looking at really our whole manufacturing piece of now that we've got the prints, we're able to manufacture, you've got them into the system, we're ready to rock and roll. Kind of leads into now us looking at making the parts and how we can help the customer save money now that it's here. And that really rolls into our whole processes, everything that we can do. I mean, being able to buy bulk material, being able to run inventory, being able to use our, vendor managed inventory systems that we can use. Our inside sales is amazing at doing that, using our customers' forecasts and putting them into the system and being able to run min-max programs for them so that it's available to ship. I mean, Denny mentioned that earlier that, if it's available and they need it tomorrow, it goes on our truck and out the door it goes. He can bring the packaging back and we can just refill it. Looking at all different processes that we have, being able to run the large runs on our coil-fed stamping operations, being able to run the shorter runs on the lasers, that mid-range volume we could run on the punch. That, if it's at that mid-range volume also, that doesn't justify, running it on a coil-fed press line, but maybe you need to have that hand-fed operations. We can do that as well. We now have the machining capabilities. We have a new lathe that's operating now. That's amazing. And then now we can finish with powder coating.
There you go.
So, I mean, it's like, what else do you need? We kind of have it covered, really covered.
Yeah, I think it comes down to flexibility, right? We have all that flexibility all within one roof.
Yeah.
And we can handle it from start to finish. And that's just been a real benefit to customers that have utilized us for that. So I think the more we can get that out in front of people, I think we're going to be able to save them some money.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the next questions, I guess, would be how does stacking parts change things for customers?
Changes everything. Stocking and batch sizes and all that. It's just a bit of wizardry, really. And it's us understanding our customers' needs. Some people do or are forced to make engineering changes often because they might need differentiation in the marketplace. Who knows why it is? And for those folks, yeah, you're doing batch processing where it's one-offs, or you're doing 20, you'll never do that same 20 again. But quite honestly, the majority of our customers can handle inventory. And the benefit there is, number one, they can keep it here. So it's not their cost until they're using it. We certainly have warehouse space with 3 locations where we can hold those parts. And we talked earlier with Denny about having proper safety stock in place to be able to move quickly. Because many of our operations, if someone's getting something that is laser cut, bent, welded, and painted, that's easily a 6 to 12 week lead time, depending on material availability and labor availability. So you can imagine if we were able to put that part in stock for them, that lead time just went to 24 hours, right? Because we can stock that for them. We don't need to worry about production lead times. We just need to have a forecast that's looking far enough out so we can do the proper planning. But we certainly have done that for people, like you mentioned, vendor managed inventory. If we can see their floor and their production times, we can actually do that for them. And again, now we're reducing that need on their buyers who have their jobs are already tough enough as it is, and just help them have the right amount of parts at the right time on their floor.
So here's another question for you, Chris. Why is warehouse space such an underrated cost?
I think people forget about it.
I think they do too.
Because honestly, all of us in these businesses, we buy warehouses. Some of them were probably bought in the 1960s or 70s. So yes, absolutely, they're off the depreciation schedule. They're paid for, but it's space.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep using up that space, guess what's going to come up in capital requests is more space. That's going to cost more money going forward. So you're always trying to reduce your footprint or your need for a larger footprint. And that's where utilize your vendors. Put some material on their floor that's managed and have it shipped in just in time, or give yourself a couple of days maybe.
Yeah.
But that's why it's often overlooked, because it's not a price tag that hits the part.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's in the business as overhead, but it's not a line item on the cost of a part.
So when our customers are looking at the price of a part, we know it's not just the price of a part. We know there's a lot of other things that go into that price of a part that I think sometimes they forget.
Well, and some of them recognize it, and sometimes it's easily missed. That typically has been an issue with offshoring, air freighting expenses. That usually hits a different GL than your part inventory GL. So you don't add up those total costs.
Yeah.
Certainly our customers are bright enough to do that, but time and time again, it's missed. The cost of having your people work overnight because of having meetings at 3 a.m. to meet in offshore accounts time, all those different things that can take place. It gets expensive. It gets wearing on your people.
Oh, yeah.
But we understand there's an important place for worldwide manufacturing, but in certain instances, it's certainly nice to have a domestic partner that can take some of that burden off their organization.
Mm-hmm.
So we certainly covered a bunch of areas today, that's for sure. And it was great to have Denny in. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. I guess when you put all these things together that we talked about, the key to cost savings is great planning, and planning early. We like to get involved with our customers' projects when they're in the design phase, so we can see how parts are being used, where they're being used, how they're put together. We like to be a part of the production and part planning process of how many do they need, how often, and what size batches, how should they be delivered. We talked about the logistics and LTL versus our vans and things like that. So it's really all comes down to planning. And we like to be really a consultant to the whole process, not just here to give them a price and say, here's a quote for that part, and we're not really interested in everything else you're doing. We're actually interested in everything else they're doing, because that's where we know we can save them a bunch of dollars.
Absolutely. We sure can. In savings, it comes from partnership, not just price. And that's what we're here for. We're here to build partnerships. Real savings aren't just about cutting corners. They're about building smarter from the start. So make sure you tune in to our next episode, when to bring your manufacturing in. It is earlier than you think. Thanks again for joining in today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fabricated Metals Podcast, brought to you by Process Metals Innovators. I'm Dana Hansen, and I hope today's conversation gave you new ideas and perspectives for building smarter. Be sure to follow the show and leave us a review if you found this helpful. And don't forget, you can download our free fabrication buyer's guide at PMILLC.com/guide for expert tips on supplier selection, lead times, and avoiding common sourcing mistakes. Until next time, keep forging ahead with PMI.